Hello, today is May 16th, 2024. I'm meeting with Mr. Ritchhart at his home in Windsor, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Del, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Very good. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Well, I was born on May 8th, 1937, just had my birthday here a few days ago, in Las Animas, Colorado. It's down in the Arkansas Valley, down in the corner. It's almost like saying you're from Kansas. We're out in the flatlands down there. My dad was a professional football player. He played for 2 years for Detroit. And so I was born and lived in Detroit, but obviously I don't remember it because I was only a year old or so. We moved down around a little bit. He became a coach, and his first job was in Fruita, Colorado, and then his next job was in Lamar. And while he was in Lamar, he went into the Navy for World War II through the V5 program. I think it's called the 90-Day Wonders. So then we moved. He was stationed in California. The universities, a lot of them were taken over by the military. They needed places, spaces, facilities, and the militaries didn't have any students because they were most of the men in the military. So he was at St. Mary's University outside of the backside of Oakland. And then we also got moved to Oklahoma. What the Navy was doing in Oklahoma, I have no idea. But then the war ended, and once the war ended, then we got out.
Do you have many memories of that time moving around and the war?
Yeah, I have pretty good memories of where we lived. In fact, interesting story, we lived in Walnut Creek, California. And so years later, after I first went into the Navy, my wife and I were in Alameda. I was going to intelligence school. And this, of course, we'd been in Walnut Creek when I was 6 years old, which would have been 1943-44. And we were back in Alameda in 1960. So I said to my wife one weekend, let's drive out to Walnut Creek, and I think I can find our old house. We lived in two German fellows owned a walnut orchard, and we rented their house, and they lived up above the processing plant. We drove out there. I drove right to the house, out in the middle of nowhere. Ironically, I didn't have a camera, so the next weekend we drove back, and the house looked just identical to what I remembered. We went back a week later, and they painted it. Here had been all those years, and it had been the same, and we went back and they painted it. But yeah, I still have memories of that.
Did your dad deploy overseas?
No, he never deployed. He was fortunate. The Navy really put a lot of emphasis on physical training for their pilots in those days. A lot of physical fitness kind of stuff. And him having been a coach and a football player, he taught, he basically taught physical fitness and exercises. And he also taught hand-to-hand combat. They taught him how to, and he'd practice on me. They had a big knife that was leather with lead in it. And I still remember that if you stabbed down, you put your hands like this and broke their arm if they were stabbing you. And so he would practice on me, and I was only, 6, 7 years old. I can still remember how to do it.
Wow.
From those days. But, and then we moved back. I went to grade school, started in California, and of course went to school in Oklahoma. And then we moved back to La Junta, Colorado, and I finished I think I went to the 3rd grade there, and then moved back to Las Animas and went the 4th through all the way through high school. Went to Bent County High School. In fact, I'm going back this Memorial Day weekend for our 69th reunion.
Wow.
I guess my highlights there is we won the state basketball championship my senior year. And I played all sports, football, basketball, baseball. Then I went to the University of Colorado. I had a combination of scholarships. Baseball helped me out a little bit. I played baseball there. And then I had a scholastic scholarship for tuition and fees, which in those days wasn't a whole lot, and today it would be a whole lot. It would be a big deal. But and once of course, the draft was still on at that time, and as it got near the end of my senior year, I knew that if I didn't do something, I was going to get drafted in the Army, and I sort of leaned toward the Navy, I think probably because my dad had been in the Navy. So I went to Denver to the recruiting depot and signed up. Or actually, I signed up at the school. They had, outside of the student union, they had a recruiting table. About the time that graduation was coming up, a lot of other people were in the same boat I was. And then, but I took the physical and all that in Denver. And
what did you get your degree in?
My degree was in education. Like my dad, I was going to be a coach and a teacher, teach math, and I had a secondary degree in mathematics. That's what I was going to teach. But I ended up throughout my career in the Navy and since doing a lot of essentially like teaching. So I think my teaching career served me, my teaching education served me well, because once I went into the Navy, in the interview they said, well, what part of the Navy you want to be in? And I said, well, you need to tell me a little bit about it. Well, there's a surface officer, you go to sea and you're on a ship, and there's this and that. And they said, well, there's an intelligence officer, air intelligence. And they said, they're the guy you see in the movies that stands up there and briefs the crews before they take off for their missions. And I said, that sounds pretty good. I'll try that. And they said, well, we prefer history majors, but we'll make an exception for you. And so I became a first assignment once I went into the Navy was, I went to Officer Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island. And then my first assignment was Air Intelligence School in Alameda, California. And then from there, my first real duty was a patrol squadron in Hawaii, Barbers Point, Hawaii. And we flew P-2V aircraft. They were a real hybrid. The plane was originally 2-engine prop, and they put so much electronic equipment on it that the weight finally got to the point that they put 2 jet engines on it in addition to 2 props. Really? So not many airplanes that had 2 jets and 2 props.
Yeah.
We called the props, or the jets, fuel dump valves, because they used a lot of fuel. We only used them to take off and land because that was the critical time when weight was a factor. Once you got airborne, you just flew on the 2 props. And after just a few months in the squadron, the executive officer came in one day to the all-officers meeting and said, they got a new program now called the Naval Aviation Observer Program, NAO, and these guys are going to be in the back seat doing the navigating, which will free up the pilots, because the third pilot was having to be the navigator and the tactical coordinator, which you coordinate when you're searching for primary mission during the Cold War era, which was primarily when I was in, was hunting Soviet submarines. And so somebody had to coordinate the effort to search for the submarines and know where to put the sonobuoys and all of that kind of stuff. So it meant like $150 flight pay a month, which almost doubled my pay. So I said, sign me up.
Now, I'm sorry to interrupt, but backing up, in the previous assignment, were you flying as well, or were you on the ground with...
This was the first assignment.
Oh, okay.
After Air Intelligence School.
Oh, okay.
And that was just schooling. This was the first assignment.
Well, the assignment where you had the
yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So normally they had created a training program for the new NFOs, but since we were already in a squadron and in Hawaii, there was a barrier squadron. They used to fly the barrier up looking for Soviet aircraft that would come over the North Pole. And these planes stayed airborne 24 hours a day. They had a plane on station. They had to constantly maintain a plane with radar surveillance to try to detect Soviets if they came over the North Pole. So that squadron was also based where I was, and they had a good program to teach new pilots how to navigate and all of that. So I went there for my training. I got 2 weeks of training, never flew a single flight. They taught you how to shoot sun lines and the stars sitting on the ground and not moving, which, is not much of a challenge. And I went back in the squadron, and 2 days later I was on a flight. So that's the amount of training I got at the beginning of the program. They don't do that anymore. But so I spent obviously 24 years in the Navy. My primary specialty was anti-submarine warfare. I actually had 3 tours, 4 tours actually. From that tour, I went to the training squadron that trained everybody in the Pacific Fleet that was going into anti-submarine warfare, land-based aircraft, P-2s, and then P-3s replaced them. We taught them and got them up to speed in the aircraft, and then they went into an assignment in one of the 12 squadrons in the Pacific Fleet. So then I had 2 other tours in anti-submarine warfare in P-3 squadrons. And the last one, I was a commanding officer. I screened for command when I was a fairly senior lieutenant commander. And usually your COs of the squadrons would be a commander, which is what I was when I took command. I had a lot of deployments. I deployed to Iwakuni, Japan with the 1st Squadron. And we flew patrols along the Soviet coast and the Sea of Japan and up in the Kamchatka Peninsula area. You constantly had to be pretty good on your navigation because we had to maintain the 12-mile limit. Otherwise, you'd get intercepted by the Soviets. There was a few years before I was flying patrols up there. They did have a P-2 shot down by the Soviets. Apparently, he either got too close and broke the 12-mile limit or whatever. But
is that something that was common knowledge, or did the Navy keep that hush?
No, that was pretty common knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, later on. But it was interesting because you now and then you had an opportunity in those early years to actually find a Soviet submarine and be able to track it. And the excitement of the crew inside, you just can't replicate.
Yeah.
I mean, once you got on top of one of those Soviets and started tracking them, of course they're underwater, but you're using a lot of your sensors and so forth. Later on in my, especially my next to last tour and my command tour, in the P-3s, we had a lot of time. The Soviets, as did the United States Navy, the United States had a triad of nuclear deterrence. They had the ICBMs, they had the submarine-based launch missiles, and then they had the B-52 and B-1 bombers, so that you had 3 different ways that you could respond, and it'd be hard to knock out all of them. The Soviets had an area in the Pacific called the Yankee East Pac Missile Patrol Area, YAMPA. And they put their submarine launch nuclear weapon submarines in that area. Interestingly, it was 1,200 miles from Hawaii and 1,200 miles from Moffett Field where we flew out of, because that way they could still reach the United States, and it made it tough for us to go out there and cover them because it was 3 hours to get on station, 3 hours to come home. So it was a 12-hour mission, 3 hours out, 6 hours on station, 3 hours home. But we would, and I'm sure we also had our own submarines out there looking for them as well as the airplanes, but we frequently detected them. We didn't want them to know how good or bad we were. So if we did detect them, we liked to stay at high altitude and hope that they didn't know we were there and how successful or not successful we were. But that was a very interesting time period during the Cold War and made our jobs very interesting.
Wow. When you say you flew high altitude, what would you normally be flying?
We would be at like 12,000 feet or so. But as you localize the submarine, you come down in altitude because as you go from maybe knowing he's within a 30-mile area of your sonobuoy that you have contact with, and then you are able to get additional buoys in and triangulate him, then you just keep coming down because to meet attack criteria, and we actually went through the process as if we were going to drop a weapon. Once we detected them, we would localize them as close as we could, and we had magnetic anomaly detection gear. It's a little stinger that sticks out on the back of that airplane, and it detects magnetic anomalies underneath the water, and it's a very short range. So when you got a MAD contact, you could drop a weapon right then because you knew you were close enough the weapon would find the sub.
Now, would you have the weapon, or would you call in somebody to?
No, we would have weapons. We didn't normally carry the weapons during those missions, but we did during exercise drills. But we would go through making an attack just like we had a weapon. We would actually open the drum base, come across, push the button, just as if we were going to attack them, just like you would in wartime.
Right.
But some of the times we would not go that far because as you get lower, believe it or not, the submarine sonars beneath the water, they can hear an airplane fly over them. If the plane is too close, they can hear the airplane. And we didn't want them to hear us, so we only did that on certain occasions. Yeah.
Wow.
But anyhow, the other very, very interesting experience I had that I think few people have had when I was in my first squadron in P2s, it was toward the end of my tour. In April of 1962, the United States had Operation Dominic, and it was the last nuclear testing that the United States did. And they did 31 tests of nuclear weapons, and they were in the 1 megaton range, megaton, million tons to TNT. And so they had rented or borrowed an island called Christmas Island. I think it's also called, or legally, Kiribati, which is just about at the equator south of Hawaii. And that's where the drop zone was 35 miles north of Kiribati, north of Christmas. B-52s out of Hawaii, Hickam Air Force Base, would fly down there, and there was a target drone 35 miles north of the island of where we were. And some of the times when they did their tests, we were airborne, and most of the time we were on the land.
Wow.
So I've probably seen 20 airborne bursts of nuclear weapons, which most people have never seen. It's an absolutely phenomenal experience. It's a little bit of a lesson in physics, because the whole island was wired with speakers, and the island's not real large, but they had speakers. And when the drop was going to go off, you knew exactly when, and everybody on the island that was military had to muster at one place. And they would do a countdown on the speakers, starting with 25 all the way down to 1, and then boom. And you had dark glasses, and everybody had dosimeters that was in the program, because you were flying in the air, you were on the ground, whatever, and they, from a medical purpose, they wanted to make sure they measured the amount of Roentgens that anybody might absorb. You were all told to look away from because it would literally blind you. If you looked at the explosion with unaided eye, it would literally blind you. It would burn the corneas. The first thing was the light. Even though you're looking away, that it would just, in fact, there was one picture in the Honolulu Advertiser, and the weapon was dropped at Johnson Island, which was about 300-400 miles away, and it lit up Honolulu at night just like it was daytime. It was just like daytime. They took pictures on the beach. It was just like daytime because of the light. Then the next thing you feel is the heat on the back of your neck. You can actually feel the heat.
And this is 35 miles away.
This is 35 miles away. Then the wind would go by, and then the last thing, which is slowest, is sound. Then the sound, you'd hear the boom, the big explosion. The thing that sticks in my mind, of course, we couldn't take any pictures. You could, because of classification, you couldn't take any photographs. But the edges of the mushroom cloud, everybody's seen pictures of that, but the edges were just churning. The energy was just amazing. And actually ice crystals would form on the edges of that churning. Now the job I didn't want, when we were in Christmas Island, we had Air Force guys, I'm trying to remember the type of airplane, they flew through the cloud collecting data. Now they had to have protective suits on and so forth, because we were safe enough 35 miles away, you weren't going to get much radiation or anything that would bother you. But they actually flew through the edges of the cloud to collect data during the nuclear tests. But that was a very unusual. Our mission, the reason we were there, we would fly out into the area of the drop zone for about 3 days preceding the drop, and make sure no shipping was headed into it, or for a couple of days. And in particular, the hours before, we would drop sonobuoys with containers that would float with messages if we couldn't get voice contact with them. And of course, they had what they call NOTAMs, which is notices to mariners, which all shipping gets throughout the world, telling them this is a drop zone, stay out. But some of them, because of economic reasons, sort of ignored it. So we would go in and then wave our wings and head out in a different direction and tell them, head this way, you got to get out of here. But that was our mission, to make sure there was no shipping moving into that area before the drops went off.
Oh, man. Wow. I can't imagine what that... Now, you had mentioned, you're in the thick of the Cold War, and you've got the Cuban Missile Crisis. What was that like for you guys when that all went down, and what was going on?
62 was a busy year, because in March to June I was part of Operation Dominic out in the South Pacific. I got transferred the middle of the year, and I went to the training squadron, which was in San Diego. And in October was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I remember it very distinctly. And I was both a flight instructor, and I was the air intelligence officer in VP 31, the training squadron. Well, as the air intelligence officer, you were the top secret control officer as well. You controlled all the top secret documents in the squadron. And our wartime orders were top secret. And we actually opened those orders and read them during the Cuban Missiles Crisis to know where we were assigned to go and what we were supposed to do in the event of war. Interesting sidelight on that is my running mate, we had 2 air intelligence officers in the squadron. And my partner was a guy in the first squadron was a guy by the name of Martin Sherwin. Marty was a very intelligent Dartmouth graduate. We were probably the only squadron in the Pacific Fleet that took the Manchester Guardian, which was a very respected newspaper that not many people knew about, from Manchester, England.
Huh?
So we took that because it was supposedly, according to Marty, the most unbiased that you could find. We also took Foreign Affairs, which was a scholarly book all about foreign affairs. As intelligence officers, we briefed the squadron about areas we might deploy in, what was going on there. A lot of our material we used was confidential and secret about, China and Russia and, so forth. But Marty then left the squadron before I did and went to VP 31 in San Diego as the air intelligence officer, and then I left and went and replaced him. He only had a short time because he was getting out of the Navy and go back into academia. Well, he was there also during the opening of the orders. He ended up writing 3 books. He later was a professor at Tufts and at James Madison. He wrote Oppenheimer, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize here about 4 years ago, and the movie was made on Oppenheimer. Marty wrote that book. He was fascinated, and I think it had to do with when we had to open those war orders because of the possibility of war. He was fascinated with nuclear power, and all 3 books that he wrote were about the effects of the bombing of Hiroshima and nuclear power and so forth. And of course, Oppenheimer was the developer of the nuclear weapons. And I read the book. He sent me a complimentary copy of all of his books. In fact, his first book he wrote, we were in Washington, D.C., my final tour in the Navy, and he was teaching in Boston at Tufts. And he would come frequently to Washington to do research at the Library of Congress, archives, National Archives, and so forth. And he'd always stay with us. He wrote a nice little endorsement to me on the first book that he wrote, thanking us. And he actually, in the endorsement, had my wife and I thanking us for putting him up while doing all his research in Washington, D.C. But unfortunately, Marty passed away about 1.5 years ago before the movie came out. Oh. I think he knew that the movie was being made, but he was obviously a brilliant guy and made me look good.
Wow. Yeah. Well, as well, too, I mean, I'm thinking of events during this period of time. You're at the height of the Cold War, and then Kennedy's assassinated. I imagine that took you on high alert.
I remember exactly where I was. I mean, the next year, Kennedy was assassinated, and I was... our air intelligence office was in a separate little building. We had those big arch hangars that they have there in San Diego, but we had a separate little building that we were in, and all of us stood around and couldn't believe it listening to the radio when Kennedy was assassinated. Yeah, that certainly stuck in our minds as well. A lot happened in 1962 and 63.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Between the nuclear testing, Cuban Missile Crisis, and Kennedy getting assassinated. Yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated when you guys sat down and opened those top secret orders. what the setting was, or are you in a guarded room? I mean, how was something like that handled?
It's probably not as dramatic as you think it is. You had to have a separate safe that for top secret. It only had top secret material in it. You could not mix anything with it. It had to be separate. Basically, we took it out, and we didn't actually read it. We took it over to the commanding officer and the executive officer, and they're the ones that actually read through it. We were there while they were doing that and discussed, what the squadron assignment would be. But I guess it wasn't as dramatic as you might think it is. But the orders were always there, and each squadron had that kind of assignment.
What was it like? I imagine you needed, obviously, security clearance and such. Did you have to go through the whole FBI investigating your background and interviewing your family? And
when I was assigned to Air Intelligence School, they right away started a background check, and actually it was pretty thorough, because I had people from my hometown call me and say, "Hey, guys were around here asking us about you." So they do a background check, which is pretty much required for secret and above. You had to always maintain, and I always kept a copy of it because I never wanted to have to do it again. You had to list every place you'd lived for the last 10 years, and actually as you got on further into your career, you had to have every place you'd ever lived from almost childhood on, every address and so forth, so they could check on it. But eventually, when I was a later very interesting tour I had, I went to a second intelligence school. I got selected for postgraduate school, and it was another Naval Intelligence school in Washington, D.C. And that was about a year. From there I got assigned to the Taiwan Defense Command, which was when the Red Guard movement was going on in China. And Chiang Kai-shek and Madame Chiang were still alive when we were there. He was still in charge of Taiwan, which was very, very, very interesting. Because when he left the mainland, when they got driven out in 1949, they went to Taiwan. And he was no angel when he moved to Taiwan with his fellow Chinese officers. They essentially took over, and if anybody resisted, they didn't live long. And he constantly wanted the people there to be in fear of the Chinese invading Taiwan. So there were machine guns on all the bridges going in and out of town. This was 1965 to 1967 during the Red Guard movement on China. While I was working, my primary job there was intelligence, and I had to have above top secret clearances, code word clearances. So it was a very interesting time, because there were, at that time, Vietnam was going on also, and a lot of the Vietnam R&R guys came to Taipei for R&R as well. You could take flights to Quemoy and Matsu, which were the two islands owned by Taiwan off of China, very close to China. My wife could go, but I could not go because of my clearances. I couldn't go there. And I also couldn't, I could go to Hong Kong, but I couldn't go to, there's another little island outside of Hong Kong where a lot of the gambling goes on. Macau.
Yeah, Macau. Yeah.
I couldn't go to Macau either. We were limited certain clearances. You could not travel there.
Was that the fear of that you would be like kidnapped?
Subject to blackmail, kidnapping,
Yeah, okay.
whatever, type of thing. They just didn't want you there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But, and then probably, if you say what was your best tour you ever had, I had a lot of good tours. I had 2 tours in Hawaii. Probably the tour when you have command of a squadron is probably got to be one of the highlights. And the other would be my last tour working Navy Legislative Affairs. But my command tour, I got selected for command, and I said, okay, what kind of commanding officer are you going to be? What's your philosophy going to be? What are you going to do? And I thought back to what tour have I had where I was the happiest and most productive? And I thought back to that tour, and I said, why? And I said, because the CO gave me a long leash. He jerked me in if I needed to be jerked in. And you got to work to your full potential. And I said, I cannot do the job. I've got 250 enlisted and 65 officers working for me. I can't do all of it. My job is to create the environment in which they can do their best. And so I worked to try to do the same thing that where I was most productive, to try to create that environment for those people so they would have their best tours. And so that was sort of my philosophy. We did win the Isabel Trophy that year, which was given to the top of the 12 squadrons in the Pacific Fleet in ASW. And then my last tour was absolutely amazing. I've got to give credit. I had sort of a mentor admiral that I'd worked for, and he had turned out that he was commander of 3rd Fleet in Hawaii when I was in my tour, next to last tour, and I was getting ready to, I'd avoided Washington the whole time, but I was going to have to go back to Washington, D.C., and so he called me over one day. I was in a different command. I was at Sinkback Fleet Headquarters, and he was commander of 3rd Fleet. And he said, have you done any thinking about your next tour? And I said, well, a little bit. And he said, well, I've done some research. He tapped into his sources back in Washington. He said, I got 3 jobs that I think would be really good jobs. He said, the one is on the CNO executive panel. It's like a think tank. He said, you do a lot of strategic analysis and that sort of stuff and so forth. And then he said, the other one is working in Navy Legislative Affairs. You work with Congress, and you're the liaison between the Navy and Congress, Senate and the House. And another one was an executive assistant, which was usually a captain for a 2 or 3 star admiral in one of the branches in the CNO's offices. And I had sort of figured out which one of those I wanted, and he said, I think legislative affairs would be your best assignment. I was really not a big academic, big thinker kind of guy that was going to do well on the CNO executive panel. Those guys were a lot smarter and brighter than I was. But the legislative affairs fascinated me, so I said that I would like. So he said, okay. He made it happen. So I went in, and basically the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army all have legislative affairs branches in Washington, D.C., doing the same thing. We can't say that we were lobbyists. We were lobbyists. Basically, you're there to get the Navy's programs approved on the Hill. You go to hearings that are hearings about the programs.
Would you speak in front of these?
No,
hearings?
we would not speak. We would take notes and see what was going on and what we had to do, the Navy, to get these programs. Was there any problem developing? Was there some resistance building up on a program? Were there particular congressmen or senators that weren't going to support it? That type of thing. And so we had our main headquarters for the legislative affairs was in the Pentagon, but then we had an office led by a captain in the House, right in the House office building, and in the Senate office building. We probably had 6 or 8 officers in each of those offices, and they dealt directly with the senators or legislators there that needed things done. And you really learned how things really worked in Washington, D.C. as opposed to theoretically how they work in Washington, D.C. We got to know all of the staff members of the heads of the Armed Services Committees, because we worked with the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee directly. And if they had a problem, they called us and said, hey, we need to know blah, 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 and I need it tomorrow. And then we'd talk them out and no, it can't be tomorrow. It's got to be a week. I know you think you need it tomorrow, but you can't get that answer in one day. And so we had a good rapport. A lot of them, interestingly enough, especially Senator John Towers was the head of the Armed Services Committee from Texas in the Senate in those days. And every key guy on his Armed Services staff was former Navy. We almost felt guilty because these guys were all Navy, and so they had sort of a natural rapport with us, I think. It made it nice. And it turned out that John Lehman was the Secretary of the Navy at that time, and he was a very, very active Secretary of the Navy, probably as much so as anyone since. Turns out that John Tower was sort of his mentor, so that was sort of nice. He had a very good relationship. I think I didn't think about this until the other day, an unusual. I had the opportunity on 2 separate occasions, once to take the chief of the Naval Operations over to call on the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mel Price. And I had a chance to take John Lehman over to call on Senator John Tower, head of the Armed Services Committee. And probably the most I've ever been put on the spot is the driver pulls up and there's the Secretary of the Navy, Lehman, and myself. We get in the car in the back seat, and he says, well, Del, what do you think I should be discussing with Senator Tower today? I'm like, what? You're asking me? And you're going over to call Senator Tower? I don't know exactly what my answer was, but it must have been all right because I didn't get fired. And then interestingly, when the CNO, we were going to go call, he had just been put into the job of Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Watkins. He was going to make his courtesy call on Mel Price, who was from Illinois, and he was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Well, Mel Price was like 91 or 92 years old. And in all honesty, his staff did most of the work. And I said, Admiral, you are not going to get any business done today. You're going to go in, and Mel Price is going to tell you about, he's got a cabinet full of ships and submarines and missiles and airplanes and all these things that have been given to him over the years, and he's going to tell you all about those and so forth. But business, I'm afraid not. You could see he just sort of, okay. So we get in, and sure enough, Mel Price starts telling him, because I'd taken other people in to call on Mel Price, telling him about this, and the Admiral took all that in, and then he says, okay, now about our priority programs that we want for this coming year and so forth. Well, after we left, we got outside, and the Admiral looked at me and said, you were right. Not a lot of business got discussed.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah, it was a wonderful tour. And then I started out as the head of we handle all the programs, the Department of Legislative Affairs. I had the guys that were all specialists in submarines, ships, air, electronic warfare, and so forth, research and development. And then the deputy left, and I became the deputy chief of legislative affairs. So there were a few times when the Admiral, who was head of legislative affairs, would be on leave, and then just before he retired, he decided he was going to go in the ministry, and so he took about a month off to see if this is what he really wanted to do. So every morning I was in the meeting with the Chief of Naval Operations and the Secretary of the Navy and all of the 3 stars and so forth.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity.
How long, when you say the end of a tour and moving on to the next, generally how long were tours?
Most tours in the Navy were 2 years.
2 years.
2 years, yeah. So that meant a lot of moving.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of impact on the family. You mentioned about family. I had probably 5-6 month deployments. I went to Japan. I went to Okinawa twice. I went to the Philippines. I went to Adak, Alaska. And of course, your wife's running the show, and when you're a commanding officer on that, when you're gone then, she's got all the wives to worry about. Yeah. Every wife that has a problem, you've got to have your own network there taking care of all of these wives, 300 and some wives. All their husbands are gone, and life goes on, and problems go on. And so the wives of commanding officers in particular do one heck of a job because they have a lot of responsibility.
Well, let's back up.
And then they're taking care of the family.
Back up then and talk about how you met your wife and wooed her. And was she through your whole Navy career with you, or?
Oh yeah,
okay.
We met at the University of Colorado. She was from Wilmette, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. We went to a school which a lot of people would know of called New Trier. I remember reading an article at one time when I was, I think, in college, that it was U.S. News and World Report had an article. It was rated one of the top high schools in all of the United States. Her class graduating class was 1,000 people. Mine was 75.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But interestingly, we met. It was my sophomore year. Our freshman year, you had to live in the dorms, and our sophomore year, 4 of us baseball players all rented an apartment right off of the very edge of the campus. If you walked from the corner of the campus, and across the street was our apartment. And so one of our roommates was a reserve catcher by the name of Jim Simplizio. Jim was short, about 5'7" or so. So he had what we called his, probably wasn't a very nice term, his midget book. All of the girls that were short, except I went to him and said, hey, I got this buddy coming to town from Western State, from Gunnison. He was a high school buddy of mine. He was going to come to Boulder for some reason. I wanted to get him a date. So I said, have you got anybody on there that's Glenn's about my size, 6'1"? He said, yeah, I got a gal in my weather and climate class that I think would really be good. So we had a party at our apartment, and Joanne was Glenn's date, and I had another date. And I sort of thought she was pretty neat, and I think she thought the same, so that I started dating her, and that was it. However, after 2 years, she was a year behind me. She was a freshman, and I was a sophomore then. She decided that college really wasn't for her, and so she decided she was going to become an airline stewardess. They were stewardesses in those days. They're flight attendants now. So she went to Cheyenne, actually. United Airlines training was in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and became a flight attendant. Meanwhile, I sort of felt a little pressure here that she was leaving, and so we got engaged. I still recall, went back, I guess it was our junior year, and the day after Christmas, 2 of my roommates and I drove back to Chicago and to meet her folks. I'd met them briefly. They brought her out to school, and they were up in Estes Park, and I went up one day and met them briefly. So we went back, and the 2 guys, one was a FIGAM, so he stayed at the Northwestern FIGAM house during the Christmas break because it was just a couple miles away from where Joanne's folks lived. And so one of the first nights that we were there, the folks set us down and in no uncertain terms said, now, if you all decide to get married early, because we were saying we were going to get married after I graduated, we won't support you. In other words, they were saying, don't think that we're going to foot the bill.
Oh.
And I said, I'm not planning on getting married till I graduate. We're on the same page here. We don't have any problem. but as a parent, looking back on it, I could see why they were concerned. I certainly can see that. Yeah. I guess one other tour that was probably ought to mention was Vietnam.
Oh, right.
We were based in the Philippines, and first in Sangley Point, and Sangley, while we were there, at one point closed down, and they moved everything over to QB Point, which is where all the aircraft carrier aircraft were, and the aircraft was at QB Point, Subic area. And what we did is we maintained I think it was a 4-plane detachment all times in Cameron Bay, but our home operation was in the Philippines. And so, of course, if you were in country at any time during the month, you got a month of combat pay. So the management was very good about making sure every crew of the 12 crews all got into Vietnam for their tour sometime during that. So I probably ended up spending a little less than half my time, the 6 months in Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
In country at Cam Bay. And what we did is we flew what they call market time patrols. They were constantly worried about the VC bringing small boats down into South Vietnam along the coast and infiltrating people and supplies, weapons. And then the battle group was in the Gulf of Tonkin, which wasn't too far from where we were. So our normal patrol was we'd depart out of Cam Bay, go up to Gulf of Tonkin, make a big round up there and report out all the surface traffic that was in the vicinity of the battle group, let them know what was on the surface, what was around them. And then we would come back and go right down the coast, and then we would go around the tip and land in Utapao in Thailand. And then the next day we'd do the reverse. We'd go back the other way. The only you think about, I can't imagine the guys that were in battle in like World War II and the Iwo Jima and that kind of stuff. I mean, hand-to-hand combat and dodging bullets. We didn't have to do any of that. But I guess about the only thing I ever worried about was at night when we had to do that market time patrol up and down the coast. You'd pick up the radar targets, and if they looked suspicious or were headed in and so forth, we would go in and drop flares to light them off so that we could see if they had any, see what they were carrying and what they were doing. Well, we had a procedure we used so that you stayed out of the light as much as you could of the flares, because our airplanes, the fuel tanks weren't insulated. A guy with a machine gun could blow us out of the sky.
Oh, wow.
That's all it would take.
Yeah, wow.
In fact, probably a good 30-06, and But I think probably what kept them from doing that, if they were an infiltrator, was that they knew we'd probably still get out a message and they were done with. Somebody'd come and take care of them. But that's about the only thing I think. And the other thing I thought was surreal. Here you are, you're in Vietnam, and we had an outdoor movie theater. And guys could all go over, anybody that was there. And it was a pretty big base. It was an Air Force base primarily. And we'd sit there and you'd be eating popcorn and drinking a Coke, and in the background, way off there, would be boom, boom, boom. Here's all the bombs going off and explosions going off, and you're sitting there eating popcorn and watching a movie.
Oh, we darn.
It was just surreal. But we always felt pretty safe. Cam Bay was on like a little peninsula, and the South Koreans guarded that access to that peninsula. The VC did not like to mess with the South Koreans. The South Koreans were known as pretty good fighters, and so we always felt pretty safe there.
Well, on the topic of safety, through all your other tours in your basically cat and mouse game with the Russians, were there any incidents where you came in contact with Russians, and any worries in any of your other tours about anything?
There were, on one occasion, we were flying out of Adak, Alaska, and of course we would go over toward the Kamchatka Peninsula, and the Soviets had a major submarine base there. And their subs would come out, and then there was a gap in the Aleutian chain that was deep enough they would come down through that gap and then out into the Pacific. That was their way to get out into the Pacific. They could also go through the Sea of Japan. But on one occasion, to maintain your qualifications as a pilot, as a navigator, the TACO, co-pilot, whatever, the Navy has a standard throughout all of aviation called NATOPS, Naval Aviation, but it's the SOP, Standard Operating Procedures. This is how you go through your checklist. This is how you take the plane off. This is what you do in emergencies. If you have to feather an engine, this is how you do it. This NATOPS was a plot. You had to, and everybody had to have a written test once a year, and an in-flight, an examiner would come with you. So we're flying up toward the Kamchatka Peninsula, and I'm getting my NATOPS check in the back, and there's only 3 or 4 guys in the squadron were designated as NATOPS checkers. And so all of a sudden, these guys say, hey, there's a Russian MiG out here on our wing. And I said to the guy, NATOPS check's over. I mean, because they pull circuit breakers and, what do you do now? Your thing's not working, this isn't working. I said, no, this is real world. No more NATOPS check. So they just came out to take a look at us. We were well outside the limit of where they would go. other very, very interesting, and I hadn't thought about this before. I hope I'm not going on.
No, oh geez, this is fascinating. Oh.
You may remember the Glomar Explorer. And I don't remember the exact year. It was in the 70s. But the Soviets lost a submarine in the Pacific. And the U.S. Navy found out about it, and they knew roughly where it went down. And they sent out this ship that had a big claw that went down through the middle of the ship all the way to the bottom of the ocean and grabbed the submarine. And well, unfortunately, it broke apart as it came back up. But anyhow, we're out on patrol one day.
That was, they hired, what, Howard Hughes to do that? It wasn't.
Yeah. Hughes built the Glomar Explorer.
Yeah.
Under the government.
Yeah.
Supervision. And we get an alert to fly out to a certain location and start, and it wasn't a normal patrol. As I recall, they launched us to go take a look. We got out there. There were 10 Soviet submarines on the surface. We were like, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, it was like a kid in a candy shop. I mean, we were going from one, there's another one over here, there's another one here, another one here. It was just pure chaos almost. And in fact, I was saying, okay, everybody, calm down now. Let's just do our job. We got to get good pictures and locations and numbers and all of that stuff. And we did. Well, intelligence knew what was going on, but they didn't tell us. We were just to go out and collect information. They told us enough to get us out there to see what was going on and to get pictures and so forth, but they didn't tell us what was going on.
Oh,
that was above our classification level of clearances. And this was not my command tour. This was when I was lieutenant commander. But it turned out that they were looking for the sunken submarine that the Glomar Explorer later went out and found.
Ah, wow.
Yeah, that was, I'd almost forgot about that. Yeah.
Were the Russians aware once we were there to extract that? Were they?
I don't think they knew that. That was like at least a year later, because they had to build that thing, and they reconfigured another kind of a ship, as I recall, and it took a long time to do that. And so I think they gave it some cover that they were doing some sort of mining, ocean mining or something like that.
Yeah.
They may have suspected it, but I don't know for sure but I don't think it got a whole lot of attention from the Soviets.
Huh. Oh, that's
I don't recall for sure. And then I guess back on the family, it's obviously tough on kids. We had 3 daughters, and probably the worst move we had to make was our youngest daughter, who lives here close to us here in Windsor. She was a senior in high school, and she was going to a private Catholic school in Honolulu. You almost had to send your kids to private schools. In those days, the public schools were so bad. It was amazing. And I got signed to Washington, D.C. That's a tough time for a kid to move, their senior year. Even though we went to a wonderful high school. I mean, we lived in an area where most of the foreign dignitaries lived, all the embassy people and so forth lived out where we lived. And so the high school was a wonderful school. I mean, I'm trying to remember the guy who gave the commencement address. He had been Secretary of the State. His kid was in the same class. Maybe I'll think of it here. But I'll never forget. We moved back to Washington, to Newport, Rhode Island. When I had a tour to Naval War College for a year to get a master's, and we moved to Newport, and we lived in heck's adjacent town to it there. But anyhow, the kids would basically go out and sit on the steps and wait till the kids come by and start talking to them, strike up and get to know them, you know, and they just learned to really adapt to making the moves, but that didn't make it easy. It was still tough on the kids. All three girls said they were never going to marry anybody that was in the military because, you know, a lot of the moving around, it's tough on kids. And a lot of people don't appreciate what the families go through.
That's right.
People in the military.
That's right.
They make a lot of sacrifices. Yeah. In fact, we had to, Debbie, our middle daughter, when I got to, one time, Moffett Field is big base for all the P3s on the West Coast. And I had 8 out of 10 years I was there. I went away for a year to go to postgraduate school, and I went away another year to go to War College, but I always came back. So out of a 10-year period, I had 8 years there. And, what was my point going to be? About the...
Debbie...
So I got, at the end of my command tour, I got assigned to SINCPAC Fleet headquarters in Hawaii. And she was in high school, and she was a senior. Well, we got to Hawaii, and we found out that the schools really weren't very good. You had to, our oldest daughter was in college by then. We finally decided, thanks goodness to our neighbors in Cupertino where we lived, which is sort of the heart of the Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. They had 2 girls, and one of them, and they were about our daughter's age, and they said, hey, look, we'll keep her. So she stayed in Cupertino for her whole senior year, just because of that factor. And thank heavens for those people, if they were willing to do that. Of course, we supplemented, mm-hmm. gave them money for food and lodging and all of that. But still, we missed a lot of her senior activities that she'd do, like prom and all that other stuff. So, it has its impacts.
So we're getting into your 24th year. Now, that begs the question, when you first went in the Navy, did you look at it to make a career of it, or were you just going to come in and do your initial enlistment?
I was going to do my time. In fact, we were in San Diego at the second tour, and I applied to the Secret Service. And I had to go through all sorts of testing. And of course, fortunately, I had all of my military clearance stuff that they didn't have to do much because, I pretty much had a lot of the things that they would have needed to do. They did some other checking up and so forth. And I remember the kind of tests, a lot of tests that you had to do. They'd give you a picture, and they'd let you look at the picture for 20 seconds, and then they'd take it away, and they'd say, okay, now what color was this, and did the person have glasses on or not have glasses on, or that, to see how observant you had to be. And I was watching a recent movie, and it was about the Secret Service and the FBI, and one of the ways they caught on something was this guy just being very observant, kind of thing. But that was one of the tiny tests. But anyhow, I got notification I'd been selected for postgraduate school for intelligence school in the Navy. Subsequent to applying, and then about 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Secret Service office in Los Angeles saying, you've been accepted, can you be here in a month to start work in our LA office? And I said, well, I hate to tell you this, but I've changed my mind. I've decided I think I'm going to stay in the Navy. I really appreciate it. They were so nice. I mean, there was no negative. It was like, that's great. That's fine. Don't worry about it. do what you need to do. And but yeah, when I went in the Navy, it was going to be a 4-year career, meet my obligation and get out, kind of thing. No regrets. I had a heck of a career.
Oh, it sounded like a fascinating career. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So, we'll take the story forward then. So, you in your Navy career, and take your story from there then.
Well, in my last tour, being in legislative affairs, a lot of the big corporations, Boeing, Lockheed, Martin Marietta, all of them, their lobbyists in Washington, D.C. are ex-legislative affair guys, because you know the game, you know the players, you know how it's all done. So there was a lot of pressure to stay in Washington, D.C., but I just figured if I didn't leave then, I would never get away. And not that Washington was a bad place, it's just we didn't want to spend the rest of our career there. Interestingly, I keep getting sidetracked here.
That's okay.
I got selected for Major Command while I was in my last tour, and I was going to be assigned to the Fleet Air Wing in Hawaii, which means you had 4 squadrons that worked for you there in Hawaii, and you were head of the wing that managed them, all the squadrons. And you sort of worked for this all your life, and I ended up turning it down, which was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because I said, if I take that job, I'm not just obligating myself for that tour, I'm obligating for 2 more tours. You don't take that tour and retire. That is a career job. And for the younger officers looking up at you don't retire out of that job. You just don't do that. And I didn't want to, you could have, obviously, but that wasn't the right image to retire out of that job. So I said, I'm obligating for 2 more years. I got spoiled in Washington, D.C. because you got a lot of exposure to a lot of people. And you said, well, if I do make Admiral, there's some lousy Admiral jobs, believe it or not. It may sound pompous or something, but there were some Admiral jobs that aren't all that good. And I said, I've had a great career, and besides that, the family would have been here, and we would have been in Hawaii. And the girls were all, at that age in college and so forth and so on. So the irony is, prior to that, while I was in OLA, my last year, another one of my Admiral mentors came to me and said, CNO's not happy with the Navy attaché in London. He wants to replace him, and I could recommend you if you'd like the job. I said, oh man, all my life I've been putting on my dream sheet, attaché. And this is really ironic. I said, it's not the right career path for getting Major Command. So I turned down being attaché to London because I wanted to keep in the right career path leading to which the next wing job was the right career path, and I got Major Command, and then I ended up turning that down, so whatever.
Wow. And so you got out of the Navy then? And
got out of the Navy. Yeah. I interviewed with Booz, Allen, and Hamilton. They wanted me to take a job in Washington, D.C. Because of my experience there. I said no. They said, well, we're opening a new office in San Diego. There'll be 5 guys there opening a new office, and so I went to work there. I worked there for and basically we were doing contract work for the Navy lab in San Diego called Naval Ocean Systems Center, and a lot of what they were doing was ASW, which was what what I did in the Navy. So it was a perfect fit there. And then I got approached by Lockheed. After being there for about 4 years, the same admiral who got me the job in OLA was now working for Lockheed. And my eventual boss at Lockheed went to him and said, "Hey, I'm looking for somebody to open a new office in San Diego with an ASW background." The admiral said, "I got the guy for you." So he did me a lot of favors. So he recommended me, and I opened a new office for Lockheed in San Diego. Eventually, my boss moved me back to corporate headquarters at Calabasas, which is outside of LA. He needed a new sort of assistant. And about the time, and I said to him, now there's rumors running around that they may be moving the corporate headquarters back to Washington, D.C. He said, "I'll check it out, but I don't think so." So he checked it out. He said, no. I said, "Okay." So we moved to Calabasas. I got a promotion to director. Within 6 months, they announced that Martin Marietta and Lockheed were merging, moving the headquarters back to Washington, D.C. I was right, but his boss couldn't tell him what was going on because mergers like that, they have to keep hush-hush. And so they said, half of you are going to get laid off, and half of you get with a severance package, and half of you will go back to the new corporate headquarters. And fortunately, I was in that half. Once we got back there, part of what my boss's job was, he had 22 field marketing offices throughout the United States. Wherever the Army, Navy, Air Force had a major procurement office where they did procurement, we had a field office because Lockheed was made up of 12 or 14 companies, and it didn't make sense for each company to have a representation there. Corporate had an office that all the companies could use. You knew what new business was, your people there knew what new business was being developed. You knew the people, you knew the contacts.
Gotcha.
So when we expanded and became Martin Marietta, or Lockheed Martin, then it was up to 22 of those field offices. And he got to the point that he just couldn't do his job. He was the VP of business development for all of Lockheed Martin. So he said, "Del, I'm going to make you a VP, and you're in charge of all of those marketing field offices." So it was a good move for me because the job just got too big for him, and he had to expand it. So I had the field offices, plus we prepared all the briefings for the board of directors every month, and prepped the CEO and the CFO for the briefings and stuff. Yeah.
Wow. And how long were you in this career there at Martin?
I did that from let's see, I moved back to Calabasas in 92, and then I retired in 99. I did that for 7 years. And we did the whole, on top of that, we were merging two huge corporations into one. In fact, the guy who had my job with Martin Marietta and we went around to every field marketing office, and some places we both had offices, Martin Marietta and we. And we talked to all the people, evaluated everything, and then we said, okay, now we got to combine these offices. We need to lay off some people, keep some people. That was a big job.
Yeah.
Merging all of that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Dan Tellep was the president of Lockheed Martin, because he was Lockheed, because he was the oldest. He became the CEO, and then Norm Augustine was the head of Martin Marietta, and then the agreement was that Dan Tellep would take it for the first year or 2 years, retire, and then Norm Augustine from Martin Marietta would take over. It all worked out very well. I once thought about writing a book about how to do mergers.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah.
Because there's a science to it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Not that I was at the very highest level, because there was a lot going on above my level, but just at the business development level, there was a
You're
lot.
in the thick of it, yeah.
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 Yeah. And then did you go into full retirement in '99, or did you go on to something else from there?
No, I retired. I did a little bit of consulting for a while, but I pretty much retired. I still do a lot of my, I mentioned my teaching background. As an air intelligence officer, that's all you did. You trained people for airplane recognition, ship recognition. You gave them briefs on what's going on in the world intelligence-wise with the Russians and the Soviets. And then when you got to the higher level as working in corporate, you're constantly giving presentations, running meetings, all that sort of stuff, which it all helped out. And then for the last 15 probably years, I've probably given over 400 genealogy lectures. I'm big into genealogy, family history. I've got 35,000 people in my tree online. And so I've scaled that back just lately, but I still, for the Larimer County Genealogical Society, I give regular presentations and stuff.
Oh, fascinating. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Looking back on your career, or a question I've got, would you have been able to give this interview years back? Was there a period of time where the Navy said you can't talk about what you were doing for X number of years? Were any sort of hush-hush in that regard?
Most of what I've discussed is certainly unclassified. Well, all of it's unclassified. Right. I wouldn't be discussing. I've been away from it so long that I probably could have done it, 10 years ago, probably, maybe not any further back than that, perhaps. But what we did and what I've talked about in general is, Glomar Explorer that news all got broken in the news, and the fact that we ran across those submarines on the surface, at the time was classified, but not now. That's, water under the bridge.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind me asking, just with, you've got your pulse, your fingers on the pulse, I think, to this day, or you certainly know more than most of the public. What are your feelings in today's global political situation with the Russians, the Chinese? How do you see things, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I really worry about the Chinese. And I know there's people that think that we may be pouring money down a drain hole to keep supporting Ukraine, but I just think that they're doing a job that a lot of the people wouldn't want to do, and the least we could provide is money and supplies. It doesn't get us involved physically in being there, but I just think Russia is just trying to push things. When are they going to stop? If they get Ukraine, then what's next? So I sort of think that we should be supporting them. And I think we just have to keep a strong military to maintain the peace. A lot of people don't get that, I don't think, is that they only, times get peaceful. Well, let's get rid of the military. We don't have any problems. Yeah, you get rid of the military, you have problems real quick. Yeah. There's people out there that are going to make problems.
Yeah, right.
And that's the way I feel about China, that we've got to maintain a strong military in order to keep them at bay. I just can't imagine them trying to take over Taiwan. It never belonged to them. The only right they have to it is Chiang Kai-shek went there and they ran Chiang Kai-shek off the island,
Yeah.
Mao Zedong. And what right do they have? A lot of the Chinese and indigenous people that were there, like when we were there, they had no great homeland to protect from the, a lot of them were Japanese, this wasn't Chinese territory. So I'm, pretty conservative as far as that goes as well. Our need for keeping a strong military.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Through the years, through your career and all these different positions and such, were you able to maintain contact with people you served with, and do you still do that? Any sort of reunions, anything like that?
We for years in San Diego, I headed up the committee. We did reunions, and we would alternate between San Diego and San Jose, because San Jose is where Moffett Field is, and that's where most of us that were all connected, about the same age group. We would do it about every other year or every third year, and we did that for about 15 years. And we would get 200 to 300 people, officers, and we would always get good speakers. We would get admirals, retired admirals, active duty admirals to speak, and it was a lot of fun. It was something everybody really looked forward to. The thing about the military that almost everybody will tell you, and I'm sure from your interviews, is the camaraderie is just unparalleled. You just don't get it anywhere else. The wives are thrown together because they have to go together because their husbands are all on deployment. You're on deployment, you got a mission. More so in the earlier days, you worked hard and you played hard. I'm not sure there's that much playing going on anymore. I'm not sure. I'm glad I'm in while I was in, from a political standpoint. But the camaraderie is just something you can't replicate anyplace. I tell young people thinking about going in the military, I said, you will never get more responsibility at a younger age than they throw at you in the military. You got guys that are 24 years old flying around a multi-million-dollar aircraft with 12 people's lives in their hands. You just don't get that kind of responsibility anywhere else.
Well, just listening to your story, just all the various positions you had, the responsibility that you had is amazing to me, anyhow. It's,
good experience.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of wind down, 3 daughters, any grandchildren, great-grandchildren?
Yep, 8 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren, about to be 9. That's easy now. The biggest challenge is remembering all the names.
Yeah, sure. Right.
All 8 grandchildren have college degrees, 2 masters, PhD, which I'm proud of.
Yeah.
And the next flight coming up. And we're fortunate here in that our a daughter who lives here, she's got 3 children. They're all adults and working and living in Denver, but we all get together for the other day for Mother's Day. And then we've got another granddaughter with 2 of our great-grandchildren living in Denver, and then another granddaughter and her boyfriend live in Boulder, and then the other daughter lives in Dallas, Fort Worth. They were just here for Mother's Day, and unfortunately, one of our daughters passed away 2 years ago.
Oh,
but, yeah.
Sorry. Oh, boy.
But we're heading for Anchorage, Alaska in July. We've got one granddaughter that's got 3 boys, and all the other of her sisters say, you don't know what you're getting into if you're going to go stay with them for 3 days. Those boys are a handful, so we'll learn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're looking forward to that. But we have a chance to get together with most of them.
Nice.
Another granddaughter lives in San Jose or San Diego area, and we go back almost every year for 2 or 3 weeks because we have so many friends. We lived there for 25 years.
Right. Yeah.
And so she's got 2 of our older great-granddaughters. One of them's in the 8th grade, in fact. Yeah, the oldest.
Well, it sounds as you described this, the 3 daughters, it sounds like there's a lot of female children.
We only have, well, the one granddaughter had 3 boys.
Oh, okay.
Up until then, we had 2 grandsons and 6 granddaughters. And now in the great-grandchildren, we're starting to get a few boys. We've got a lot of girls. A lot of girls. Yeah.
Well, Dallas, we start to wind down this interview. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about? Any stories that floated up to the top as we've been sitting here talking? Or do you think I'm certain we only got the tip of the iceberg, I'm sure, on your story, but is there anything else, or do you think we pretty much covered everything to pretty much round off your story?
I think we covered most everything. We don't want to go on too long, but I recalled certain things as we went through, and fortunately we went back and covered those. But I just wrap up saying that it's been a wonderful career, and you can't do it without a lot of family support and understanding on part of your wife and your kids, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I really want to thank you for sitting down to tell what I consider a fascinating story, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. Thank you.